Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for The Voice of Leadership, the show for business executives and global corporations who appreciate a biblical perspective on life and leadership. You are listening to our Fab 500 series featuring some of the best of our 500 episodes and celebrating the 30th year of Trans Leadership Inc. Brian Smith has charted his own course to become one of the great entrepreneurial success stories of our time. In 1978, Brian Smith, the founder of UGG Boots, imported 6 pairs of sheepskin boots from Australia with a dream to build a business where every American would eventually be wearing the product. That is how one of the world's most recognizable brands began, and sales of UGG products have exceeded $1 billion in each of the past 5 years. Today, Brian enjoys guiding entrepreneurs and business professionals on their journey to success by sharing lessons he learned while building the UGG brand. His compelling book, The Birth of a Brand, details multiple stories about his entrepreneurial and executive journey, and from which both seasoned and beginning executives can derive great insight. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today on The Voice of Leadership and on Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership.
Hi, Dr. Karen. Thanks so much for having me.
I am delighted to have you, especially someone as seasoned as you are, having gone through the school of hard knocks and learned along the way how to build a really successful business. And I know that you have lots of insights to share with the people in my community.
Sure, I'd love to.
Well, wonderful. So I'm going to just jump right in. First of all, let me just say this. I know that you are Australian. You were born and raised there. So how is it that you got this notion or idea to bring sheepskin boots to America, and especially to the California surfing community, as opposed to out here in Colorado in the snow area where I live, or Minnesota, or into the Northeast or someplace like that?
Yes, it doesn't seem natural, does it? I was an accountant it took 10 years of studying to graduate as a CPA, which is, and I quit the same day I graduated because I really didn't like being an accountant in that industry. At the time, I was quite into meditation and spiritual practices. And I remember meditating one morning thinking, and I got this feeling that, oh my God, all the big trends are coming out of California. And I've always been one to follow that intuition that comes through because I believe it comes from outside. So I thought, all waterbeds and Levi jeans and all the surf brands are coming out of California. I'm going to go to California and find the next big thing to bring back to Australia. So that's how, I never intended to do UGG boots. I went there looking for anything completely different, right? But it was 4 or 5 months in California, and I spent most of my time surfing up at Malibu because I'd been a surfer since a little kid. And it was about October or November. The water was getting really chilly and the wind was cold. And after the surfing there with my friend, I was pulling on my sheepskin boots that I'd brought from Australia, and I just got this massive dose of goosebumps. And I went, oh, my God. And I turned to Doug and I said, Doug, 1 in 2 people in Australia own a pair of sheepskin footwear, and there's none in America. We are going to be instant millionaires. Let's go into business. And so that was the story of how UGG was like birthed. The conception happened on the beach, and then we called up, if we did a little research on manufacturers and put an order in for 6 pairs of samples, and that was like the birth of UGG. And then the rest was just all the horror stories of growing the business.
Well, yes, there are lots of horror stories along the way in growing any business. And one of the things I would certainly say in your case is that it was not a straight line function. It wasn't an overnight journey to success. there were a number of setbacks. There were naysayers along the way. And
Yeah.
you mentioned that you had sort of like a spiritual epiphany, even on the front end of it. So,
Yeah.
how did you end up sustaining the faith to keep going, given all various setbacks that
Yeah.
you experienced?
I think faith was probably the most important feature of my life for 20 years because there were so many signs saying that you should, even my friends were going, no, you're crazy. Sheepskin in California, that'll never work, right? But Australia's climate is identical to California. So that was what I kept coming back to. It kept sustaining me was that, look, they're all over Australia. It's not the product's problem. It's me. There's something I'm not doing to not make this successful, right? And so, we ordered, we went to a bunch of shoe stores and they shut us out completely like you're crazy. But I noticed all my friends at Malibu were thinking it was a fabulous product. And it struck me that so many California surfers had been to Australia on their surf trips and brought 4 or 5 pairs of boots back for their buddies. So within that little market, it was very, very popular. So we started selling to the surf shops. And initially it was like, oh my God, you're going to make a fortune. Every store owner we went to thought we were going to make a fortune because they all owned a pair. And so that emboldened us to buy 500 pairs from this manufacturer. We raised about $20,000, which in today's money is about $80,000. And we ordered 500 pairs and they arrived. And when we went back to the surf shops, we were met with, well, yeah, you're going to do fantastic, but we couldn't sell them in our store because we just sell surfboards and trunks and flip-flops, and they're way too expensive. You should go to the shoe stores, right? So here we were with our big ideas, my friend Doug and I, and after going to every single surf shop, we ended up tallying up our first delivery order for the year, which was our year's sales. It was 28 pairs. Just happened to be exactly $1,000, and we'd bought 500 pairs in for how successful we were going to be.
That's just amazing in and of itself that, you were quite optimistic, let's say, at the beginning, and then reality was showing a different story. Yet at the same time, I would say this, you kept getting this infusion of people saying, oh, this is a great concept. You're going to make a lot of money. Wasn't manifesting at the time. However, everybody was talking about it, which kind of makes me think about this concept you often talk about, that concept of how you can't give birth to an adult. You've got to go through these stages that include the infancy, the toddler years, and just like humans, businesses go through phases and stages. So say a little bit about that concept and how it applies to what you learned growing UGG.
Sure. After I sold the UGG company, which was about 20 years later, I ended up writing a book about the process because I'd kept all of the records for 20 years. And the theme of my book is that you can't give birth to adults, right? If you look at the stock exchange page on the Wall Street Journal, every business there started with someone conceiving the idea and taking the first action, which is giving the birth, right? So my birth of UGG was buying 6 pairs of samples. And then every business just lies there and it lies there. And entrepreneurs, they when they had that first aha and they take the first action, they're going to set the world on fire and everybody's going to beat a door to them. Well, it never happens that way. It just lies there, and that's okay because an infant can't get up and go to college, right? It has to be an infant. And as long as you keep feeding it and changing the diapers, you'll get a giggle now and again, but eventually it'll start toddling. And that's a really exciting phase because the first magazines are writing articles about you, and your true believer friends are going out telling all their friends about it. And then you start getting orders and it takes on a bit of a life. And that quite quickly goes into the youth phase, which is the best because in youth, you've got consistent productions working, orders and sales are coming in, admin is working, the warehouse and shipping is working, everything's clicking, and you can run a $20-30 million company in that youth phase. But if it's a really great product or a really great service, you're going to hit the teenage years. And do you recall when you were a teenager, you wanted to be at every party on a Saturday night. Well, it's the same in business. You want to be in every major trade show, and you want to be in every major, mass distributor. And it's like suicide if you go too fast in that period, and you'll lose control completely. But then eventually, the maturity comes in. The accountants put all the controls in. So that's a natural life cycle. And the sad part is that I see so many entrepreneurs who have that aha, and I'm going to be famous. And then they hit the infancy, and many, many, many of them just go, it's not going to work. I'll give up.
They don't realize it. That's just the natural part of the growth cycle. It's just like with your babies you're raising at home. You don't give up on the baby because they can't get out of the crib by themselves or anything.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You keep nurturing it, and however long it takes in the baby phase, you go through it. And I think part of it is just knowing that that's the expectation. If you don't know this, it can be frightening, and you can think, oh, this is not a good idea. It's over before it even starts, if you will. So I think that's part of it. So Brian, your business went through these cycles, and it took some years to get to the place where you could really see the benefit and the growth, and you continued along the way. There are other businesses that appear to be overnight successes. So maybe somebody starts out with the concept, a year later, they're already into the multi-millions. What would you say about those businesses? Are they going through those cycles just more rapidly? Or do you think they've maybe skipped something that they have to get back to later? What's your observation?
It'd be interesting for me to see a business that went into the millions in a year. That would be a bit of a stretch. But the thing is, with today's technology, like back when I was doing this, if it was a product, you had to buy the product, have it manufactured, bring it in, sort it out, ship it out, individually as to what the customers wanted. And that was a long process. And then to get them to buy, you had to do a long advertising process, which was taking photographs, having them taken to a printer, and then, print ads done. It took like a month to do one advertisement. Well, with technology today, you can take a photo and you have an instant web page. If you're dealing in a product that is electronic, like software program or something you can sell as a service, those things you can go very, very quickly on, right? You can, as long as there's no warehousing and product storage. But if it's electronic and somebody pays $59.95 and you go click, they got it, then you can scale a business into the millions very, very rapidly. But those opportunities aren't everywhere. And if anyone thinks they can go into business online with a new bottle of vitamins, right? They're the more successful they get, the more trouble they're going to get into, because you can't just ramp production from nothing to maximum. And that's why businesses take 10, 15 years to really get into the billions. It's almost impossible for a company to get into $1 billion like overnight.
You're really bringing up something important, which is what is kind of the infrastructure that a business needs if it's going to continue to grow and continue to succeed. Yeah. And you're saying, you might get the orders and you might have the business in that sense. You may not be able to fulfill them if you have not built the infrastructure to support the level of business that you've got.
Yeah, and you could take that one step further, where your sales are unbelievable, your marketing is so compelling. And believe me, I bought stuff on the internet that when I got the product, I go, I should never have fallen for this, right? But, then if the customers aren't satisfied and they want to return it, then, where's your infrastructure then? How many customer service people do you have to take the refunds and all of the problems and respond to all of the issues that come with it? It seems like an easy business by the promoters who want you to buy the product. But man, when you're in the actual business itself, it takes quite a group of people to even take a company to $1 million in sales.
Absolutely. And I know one of the things that you experienced in your business is what I would call the need for capital along the way, and especially because you had a product, you had to purchase inventory. And so a lot of fledgling companies have to deal with this. They have to advertise, market the company, just like you're saying. So in your case, how did you find investors, and what were some of the ups and downs that you ran into with the investors along the way?
Yeah, that was probably my worst facet of knowledge. Right? I was an accountant. I was a chartered accountant with a CPA, but I didn't understand finance. And it's a different animal. Finance is forecasting what cash flow you're going to need. Accounting is what happened last year. I'll do all the numbers. I'll tell you if you made a profit or not, right? And so they're two very different animals. And I didn't understand finance. So when I was, thinking, okay, we just sold $1 million worth of product and I'm broke. What's the solution? Oh, I'll sell $2 million worth of product next year and then I'll have tons of money. But the reality is it costs twice as much to bring in the extra inventory and the extra staff and the extra shipping and all that. And so at the end of $2 million worth of sales, you got less money than when you did a $1 million in sales. And so I never really understood that process until 10 or 12 years into the business. So I was always at the whim of, because I was doubling, I was extremely good in sales and marketing, right? So I could do trade shows, I could sell like crazy. But the more we sold, the bigger the problem was getting in inventory. And so I started with a small investor. And then when I needed twice as much product, he couldn't afford it. So I had to get a bigger investor, and that guy didn't want the original one. So I had to buy the original investor out, and then we're on for the next level. And then we got too big for that guy. And so you can extrapolate that through 3 or 4 investment rounds. And it was not a pretty sight. But my faith, again, it always came back to my faith that 1 in 2 Australians has some sort of sheepskin footwear. It's not the problem of the product, it's me. I'm not doing something that needs to make this successful in America.
I love that, because you were going back to, in essence, the initial vision of it, and you knew the vision still had merit, that it still had worth. So the how to, you have to figure out as you go along. You didn't abandon the vision, maybe how you do it, the way you approach it, and the way you go about it. So if you dial back again, thinking about these investors, what's maybe a nugget or two that you learned about getting investors that you could share with people today that might help them?
Sure. The one thing I know about investors now that I didn't know then is that every entrepreneur has got this bus that they've built, and it's just rocketing along. And they want investors to jump on the bus. Hey, we're going to make millions. Come on, get on the bus, right? What they don't realize, and I never did at the time, is the investors want to know, how do I get off the bus, right? With my capital intact, hopefully with a profit, and hopefully having had a good time with you guys, right? But the entrepreneur never sees that. They're never forecasting out front far enough to see where the exit's going to be, or the exit's going to be unrealistic for investors coming in. So the game with investors is like a dance, right? You have to be attractive enough for them to want to come out on the floor and dance with you, but they've got to be able to have a quick release if they want to get out, and you don't know the steps, right? If you start stumbling over your steps and don't understand them, then they're going to start to wonder, whoa, how do I get off this dance floor? So I was never very good at it. I had a series of investors that, got bigger and bigger. And eventually I was lucky enough to, well, I'll say lucky. I'm going to tell you a story. This is a 2 or 3 minute story. I got to the point where I had these 3 new investors had come into the business. They were going to handle all the shipping and warehouse duties, and I was just going to be on the road selling, because I'd become a really good salesman by now. So we had Neil, Paul, and Joe, and we were all going to share the company 25% each. And the one proviso in the deal was that I didn't actually get my 25% certificate issued until I finished up a little trademark lawsuit that I was having with a company called UGHS. So we all went into the deal and signed up and moved everything up to Anaheim where their warehouse and distribution was. And I went on the road, and the very first store that I went into was a good friend of mine at Huntington Surf and Sport. And I walked in the door and he said, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the company." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I called an order in this morning. They said you don't own the company anymore." I said, "You're kidding me." They said that. And I got out of there and I went next door to the Shell gas station, because this is before cell phones, and I called up Neil at Anaheim and I go, "Neil, what are you telling people?" And he says, "What do you mean?" "So you're saying I don't own the company?" He says, well, you don't, you don't get your stock issued. And I go, "Yes, I do. You're my 3 new partners." And he says, "Well, you don't get your stock issued." And I just hung up. I drove back to San Diego where I lived, and I pulled out the contract and I read it and I reread it, and I go, "Oh my God, technically I'm not an owner of the company." And I went into this huge depression, and for 3 or 4 days I just moped around the house, and I didn't speak to anybody outside except my wife, who was there. And I think it was on the 3rd or 4th night, I was lying on my back on the living room floor watching TV, and I clicked the television off because the show ended, and I rolled over on my stomach, and I got up on my hands and knees and started crawling towards the bedroom. And my wife, Laura, just looked at me, and she's a really quiet person. She just looked at me and said, "You get up now and walk to bed like a man." And she scared the heck out of me. And the weird thing is, though, as I got up off the floor, it was like my head was poking out the top of a big fog. And I started to think, oh my God, there's so much more to life than this crappy little sheepskin business, And that night I slept like a baby. And the next morning I was back in pretty good spirits again. And so I had breakfast and I started meditating and, just praying to God, going, "Okay, God, what can I do with my life? Will I do real estate? No. Business broker, maybe. Accounting, never." And then I got this dash of goosebumps, which I do when I get this inspiration. And it was like, oh my God, I've come to love sales, right? Now, what can I sell? And that's when I got the goosebumps, and I thought, oh my God, UGG boots, I'd love to get a pair of UGG boots on everybody in America. So I called up the guys at Anaheim and I said, "Look, I may never own the company, but I just want to get UGG boots on everybody in America. So let me come back. I'm going to go on the road, but promise me you won't tell anybody that I sold the company, right? Because I'm going to own it again when I get my 25% of stock, right?" So, I went on the road and got back a month later, and Neil handed me an envelope. It was a check for $5,000. And that was the first money I'd ever pulled out of the company, right? And the next month I got back a check for $10,000, another check for $10,000. And the philosophical lesson here is that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments will become your greatest blessings, right? And I say this from the stage, and I can have an audience of 400 or 500 people, and I say, raise your hand if sometime in the last 12 months something happened in your personal life or your business life that at the time you thought was the greatest disaster, and now you look back and think, thank God that happened. And I promise you 80% of the audience puts their hands up, so it's a very powerful piece of philosophy.
This is such a compelling story, and it reminds me of several things. Sometimes what we don't know can get in our way. So when you're making these agreements, I say for the investors, you didn't realize what the true implications of that would be, that you would no longer own the company technically. And if you had known that, you could have had that agreement up front about them not telling people that you don't own the company or whatever it is. So that was kind of a shock. And then, just this whole notion of planning the exits in relationships and situations and partnerships like this as well, thinking about what an exit might look like and the different ways people can exit so that you are also agreed to it on that front end, what that looks like. And then, I mean, that day you were crawling to bed, so to speak. It's the realization of, what have I now developed as a core skill? And I know you didn't have this core skill at the beginning, the sales thing. You were kind
That's
of
right.
afraid of it,
Yeah.
but you had developed it. You had become a great salesman, and you still believed in the vision to say, I'm still going to sell these boots to get them on every person in America. So it's going back to the basics again, going back
Yeah,
to the fundamentals.
the vision and the faith, along with keeping that vision. If you look, I've just told a couple of little stories already. I could have given up after selling 28 pairs, right? Oh,
Of
forget
course.
it, right? After I learned I lost the company, I could have just walked away from that, and I didn't. Now, here's the kicker to that story. So for the next 3 years, I was on the road traveling all across the country. We had 30 sales reps, and each rep, when I'd fly into Oklahoma, for instance, the rep had to have 10 best retail accounts, and we'd go visit them all. So for 3 years, every year I was visiting 300 retailers across the country. So I was making friends all across the country and making a lot of money. And in that 3-year period, Neil bought Paul and Joe out. So he owned 100% of the company. And then in the fourth year, we were just entering the fourth year with him, he was in a motocross race and had a massive heart attack and died, right? And before that had happened, he'd seen how good I was for the company, and now he'd bought the other two out. I'd finished the lawsuit. He called up the lawyers to come in and issue my 25% of stock like the following Wednesday. And over the weekend, he died, right? And we'd taken out life insurance policies on each other and bought company cars and everything. So fast forward, I promised his widow, who she'd never stepped foot inside the business. And I said, look, I'll do everything I can to try and keep it alive and figure out where we're at, because I hadn't been inside the business for 3 years, right? And so I had to try and figure out where everything was at and keep it alive for the year. And then I just managed to, my supplier abandoned me and brought on a new distributor for America because he didn't think I'd pull it off. And I was able to get alternative product in and save the brand. We didn't, it was a mess, but we saved it. And here's the kicker. Between Christmas and New Year, two things happened, right? One, the life insurance company called up and said, hey, we got this thing on the books. We want to clear it off before December 31. Can you come up to LA? So my attorney and I went up to LA, and we ended up settling on the lawsuit, or, the life insurance policy. And it was just enough money to buy the business back 100% from his widow, plus give her all the profits for the year, or full price for all of the assets and everything. So she was, instead of being left destitute, now had a pretty good nest egg for her life. I owned the company 100% again. I mean, completely broke. I had no money because we gave it all to his widow, but I owned the company 100% again and was able to stay in business.
It's so interesting what you've already shared, because I'll put it this way, and I'll put it in sort of the language I might use, is when God has something for you, even with the setbacks and other people seeming to take over, it comes back to you. And this story to me is such a profound example of how things come back to you, if you will. I mean, it's just amazing to me. It couldn't be wrested away, even if they tried to.
I know.
That's what I love about this story. Now, there's something else I also want to insert in, because I think I know where you're going, but I want to insert this thing in because it's such an important piece. You were talking about that lawsuit that you had, and this is in the kind of the rubric of, what do you do with competitors? Because you were not the only person from Australia who had this notion that they somehow wanted to get in on the market and sell these sheepskin boots in America. And I'm thinking about one woman competitor in particular.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that story, because you learned some things there too about how to deal with competition. So talk about that.
Yeah. The interesting thing with UGG is that you can't really patent a shoe. because like every design has been thought of for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, right, for shoes. So it's very hard to patent something that's not like a technical climbing boot or something. The colors and the styles, I'm going to give you the answer and then support it, right? Within my company, I developed the mantra with every one of our sales staff and all the design people and the technical people. Okay, let's get out front first and then run faster, right? And the reason I came up with that is that I noticed that, like, I had the creativity for new colors and styles. So I would work with the manufacturers in Australia and I would get the samples in and I put them out on the trade show tables, right? And I'd notice every year that there's these Japanese coming along with cameras and other, Americans coming along and they're photographing all the stuff. And I knew that, okay, next trade show, they're going to have everything on this table. They're going to have copied it, right? So I would get with my design team and we'd go away and we'd think of new colors and new styles. And so the next year when we showed up, sure enough, there's all our last year's product all over the trade shows, but we've got new products, new styles, new colors. And we managed to stay ahead of the competition for like 15 years. Just keeping that principle of getting out ahead first and then running faster.
I love that. I mean, to me, that is such a huge and important aspect in business. And one of the things I know I share with my clients is the whole notion of what I call creative advantage as opposed to competitive advantage, because in creative advantage, you are doing what others are not doing and what only you can do best in essence, because a lot of competitors are all about copying, not about true innovating. And what you're talking about is how innovation makes the difference. Hi, this is Dr. Karen, dropping into today's show to remind you that one of the most important roles of an executive leader is to quickly make big and right decisions for the business. Are you looking for an experienced and trusted advisor to come alongside you as a thinking partner as you make those decisions? Then contact me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Now back to the show.
Yeah. And it sort of leads back into that story I was talking about when we had that competitor come in. It was a windsurfing company called Thunderwear, and they made wetsuits and gloves and stuff. And so they called their boots Thugs. They were same ones from my factory, my manufacturer, but they just put a label on the back called Thugs, right? And so when we went to this fateful trade show in September, the year I was having this departure of my manufacturer, I had a table which had really crappy product, all last year's stuff, right? And they were showing the Thugs product in the same trade show, right? And that's when I thought, oh my God, we're dead. They're going to, the product's so good, because I designed it all. Their product is so good compared to what I have out today. But fast forward for 2 months, and between Christmas and New Year, the second thing that happened is the customs broker screwed up and sent 2,000 pairs of my UGG boots to Thunderwear and 4,000 pairs of Thugs to me, right? So I called the guy up and I drove up to San Clemente, which is about 25 minutes away, and we swapped all the product out. And as I was driving back home to San Diego, I was thinking, sort of meditating and thinking, oh my God, how come we couldn't keep our warehouse product in inventory for 24 hours? Every time we got a shipment, it was gone, right? Retailers were driving down to pick it up, and I was shipping other stuff back east. And this had been a frenzy for like 3 or 4 months up to December. And I'm driving back home. How come we couldn't keep product in the warehouse for 24 hours? And the Thugs warehouse was floor to ceiling full of sheepskin boots. And that's when I finally had the realization, oh my God, my customers were so loyal to me that they refused to buy the Thugs and they could have easily bought them and sold it to their retail, through the retail outlets, but they knew what had happened. And remember, I was traveling with the sales reps, 30, 300 retailers a year. Well, those guys were the biggest retailers in the country, and they all refused to buy the thugs because they found out what had happened with this end run behind me. And that's the power of customer service and knowing who, knowing your customers and the customers knowing you, and being able to, have them become loyal when the chips are down. And that to me was one of the most important lessons of the entire business was, how you treat your customer, how you treat your purchasers.
This is such a really critical point that you're sharing right now as well, because by this time you have built the brand and you have built brand loyalty along the way. And I mentioned that word relationships earlier. You had developed relationships with these people. So you were not just a name on a page or some abstract concept. They actually knew you as a person. Yeah. And it dials me back to something else you said, because I'm going to quote this. This is something that you learned from one of the big stores. They said, remember to service the mice and respect them as much as you do the elephants, while waiting for the elephants to take notice. Was that Sears?
That was a group called Montgomery Ward.
Oh, Montgomery Wards. That's right. Yes.
And,
I remember that.
And that was hilarious. In fact, there were 2 or 3 pieces of advice I got from retailers over the 20-year period. That was one of the key ones, because I was feeling like I was a failure. I was getting into surf shops and little sporting goods stores, and I had this low volume business going, 6 pairs here, 10 pairs there, and I was looking at Nordstrom and Saks and Montgomery Ward and Kinney's and wondering why can't I get in these big stores, And I was in the buying office in Chicago at Montgomery Ward, and I was explaining, hey, why can't you give us a big order? And he just crossed his arms and he looked back and he says, hey, Brian, don't you get it? We're the elephants. We don't move until the mice are running around under our feet, right? And like instantaneously, I got what he meant. I mean, oh my God, I'm chasing the wrong, goals. And then I came back and I redoubled my efforts on making marketing programs for these smaller stores and the surf shops and the ski shops and the retail. And pretty soon, the volume and the brand awareness became so great that all the department stores started calling us, going, hey, what are these Uggs? Everybody's in our store asking for Uggs. I don't even know what they are, And so that piece of wisdom from Montgomery Ward was a classic.
Your whole story is really about lessons like that you've learned along the way, and little snippets that people said that you took to heart and implemented and made a difference. Maybe give us at least one other of those little snippets that you heard from somebody along the way that made a difference.
Okay, I'll give you 2, but they're related. Okay. So back to the surf shops. I'm trying to figure, okay, now I've got to make these surf shops. I was in one of the shops one day, and we had 4 or 5 pairs of boots up on the shelf, and I was, cleaning them up, and this customer walked in, and they picked up one of the UGG boots and said, hey, what are these things like? And the store manager goes, oh, I don't know. We've had them for a couple of weeks. And the guy says, well, they're really expensive. And he goes, yeah, they're really expensive. And I was watching this interaction, and the guy put the UGG boot down, and then he walked off and looked at some other stuff. I was almost flabbergasted how this guy didn't sell him a pair of UGG boots, right? So I conceived what I called the 6-pair stocking plan. This is the most, out of all of the millions of dollars I spent on marketing, this was the most critical one, the 6-pair stocking plan. If you will buy 6 pairs and put them on the shelf, I will give a free pair to the manager to wear, right? So fast forward a couple of months. Now I'm in the store again, and the guy will, a customer walks in and picks up the UGG boot. What are these like? And the manager goes, "Oh my God, they're the best things in the world. I mean, I'm wearing them. I mean, those are, well, they're sort of expensive. Oh, they're not expensive. You'll get you such great value out of it, right?" And so that completely spun the entire sales numbers within every store just by having somebody knowledgeable who had tried them on, right? And I'm going to dovetail that into the same year I was at a big trade show in Las Vegas, a ski show, and we'd had 3 days no orders, because all the people are from New England and Vale and, all across the snowy areas. And they look at these sheepskin boots and go, "Oh, they'll never work for us. We have mud and we have slush and we need rubber and we need sorrels, And anyway, this woman came in, and I knew she was the owner of like 15 ski shops in New England, right? And she came into the booth and was talking to my salesman, and she's holding him and going, "No, these would never work for us. No, we have slush and we have wetness, and these look too delicate." And I just like went, I snapped, and I just sort of walked calmly over and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you mind taking your shoe off and trying one of these on?" "Oh, no, I don't need to do that. I can see how warm they are." And I said, "Ma'am, please just do me a favor." And she was wearing a pair of Reeboks, right? So she took them off and had bare feet, and I had her put an UGG boot on. And I heard the most common thing I always hear from people putting UGG boots on for the first time, right? It was, "Oh my God." And she goes, "These are the most comfortable things I've ever had on my feet. Man, I could put these in the after ski department." And she ended up buying like 20 pairs for 15 stores, like 300. That was more than like our previous year's sales almost, right? And I realized then how powerful it was. And so from then on, all of my sales force, when they went out on the road, they were not allowed to start selling until the recipient had tried a pair on. And that was by far the biggest marketing thing, or it was like an aha, right? But it was an observation that I turned from a negative into a positive, and then bought. I mean, I couldn't keep boots in the warehouse for years after that.
It's such a great story because it really speaks to the power of experiencing something to know its value. And I think car salesmen know this, that you just can't come to the showroom and look at a car. They want you to get in it. They want you to drive it, because then they know you're going to fall in love with it in a different way than if you just looked at it. So it's the same principle or concept.
Identical, yeah.
And I think what's different is because you're coming to the US market where people were not familiar with the product. This was even more necessary than in Australia. Everybody knew what it was like in Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. The awareness was a complete 180, yeah.
Yeah, so these are wonderful, wonderful lessons that you've learned along the way about what works and what to do. So let me ask a maybe oddball question, and that is, you've learned over the years a tremendous amount, okay? Take the wisdom that you have now and today, and imagine that you were dropping yourself back into 1978 when you were starting the company. What might you do a little bit differently? Same conditions as back then, but a little bit different than you did do because of the wisdom you now have.
Yeah, well, definitely with the wisdom I have now, I would have understand the cycle of manufacturing and the need for good financial forecasting, right? Because instead of just saying, "Oh, I've just bought 1,000 pairs, I'm going to double my money," not understanding the ramifications of having to pay the cost of the product back and marketing and advertising, I would have handled it differently and got a much bigger investor in from the beginning, where I didn't have to keep diluting myself down and down and down and down and down. Now, having said that, had I done that, I probably might have ended up having a more secure business, but I probably would have still only owned 10 or 15% at the end, whereas the way the route I took, I ended up 100%. So you can't really go back and do things any different. I learned the biggest lesson, which is about time, right? time is relative. Like when you don't have goals and you don't know what you're going to do, you got all the time in the world. Like all that time I was traveling around Perth, wondering what am I going to do with my life. I had so much time, I just, didn't know what to do with it. But when I got to America and then I found, oh my God, there's no sheepskin boots in America, that type of time disappeared instantly, and now I don't have time. Oh my God, I need suppliers. I need to get a trademark, lawyer. Oh, I need to, how do I get an office? How do I advertise? So suddenly there was no time, right? And so I had to really, really, and this is normal for people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, which I was, right? And that's when you build and you secure assets and then you make yourself steady and reliable. And then once you've done that and you get to sell the business, then there's a different type of time takes over. And this is what I call the most valuable time. And this is a societal thing that I want to talk about really quickly, is that I have come to find that unselfish loving has become a very high priority for me, right? And it's because I'm seeing the divisiveness and the vitriol and the separation that's going on in media and people. And I don't follow Facebook, but I hear all about the bad stuff there. And we've been sort of driven against each other. Whereas if you looked at 90% of each one of us, we're identical. Our ideas are to be the same. And I'm talking, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Christian, you could be a Hindu, you could be whatever, If you got them all together and said, well, okay, what do you believe? What do you believe? What do you believe? 90% would be the same values, but the media's got us fighting about the last 10%. And so what I'd really like to do, and what I'm trying to do is, one day just try and get to know somebody a little better, because once you know them better and you figure out where they're coming from, your attitude sort of slowly changes and you go, oh my God, you're really close to me on these values, and eventually you start liking people more. So I just hope that this whole media thing that we have going now, which is it's come on to us so fast that we haven't had the emotional skills to keep it in proportion. And so I'm hoping that over the next 10, 20 years, we get the emotional intelligence to sort of balance out that, so people can use the internet and information in a really positive way. So that's my prayer and my hope for the planet.
Well, you're really talking about building into people, and it's such an important aspect. You're sharing this journey. Your book is The Birth of a Brand. This is an excellent book, by the way. I want to tell people I've been reading it. I love it. It's a fun and engaging and enjoyable read to just hear the story of another business. And as a business person myself, it's very interesting to me to really hear about your journey. So I want you to tell people, we've been talking about the concepts in the book this whole time, but tell them a little bit about why you wrote it and what do you think they'll get out of it? Who is it for?
It's basically an entrepreneurial roadmap. And so if you're in business or you've been in business, if you've been in business, you'll recognize pretty much everything in the book and go, oh my God, I thought I was the only one, right? But if you're a beginning entrepreneur, there are a huge number of steps on, things to look out for and avoid, and what happens if you get into a situation like this. Most of my friends and people tell me it's a page turner. And
it is.
It's because at the end of every chapter, you're never sure I'm going to be around the following chapter, right? And I deliberately wrote it that way. So it's like a TV series. At the end of each episode, it's, oh my God, can he survive this, right? And it's a really fun book in that respect. But there's tremendous amount of philosophy and a tremendous amount of my sort of growing spirituality that comes through, that will make you understand how to withstand some of the horrible things that, especially the isolation. When you're an entrepreneur, you can get very isolated and think you're the only person in the world that has these problems. And I try to explain, hey, you're not Robinson Crusoe, right? This has all been done before. and I give ways how to move out and establish contacts, how to get like-minded people to do it.
And I think that's really the key too, is finding the like-minded people and recognizing that no matter what the setback is, it can be a stepping stone to continue where you're going. Because
That's
I
right.
know, as I was reading about that one competitor, the woman competitor, I'm like, my gosh, how are they going to get out of this? What's going to happen? And I think that in business, there are things we run into where you wonder, am I going to, live the next day, to
Absolutely.
get out of
That's
this type
very
of
true. That
story?
happens all the time. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think if nothing else, it's the encouragement that that is just the pathway,
Yeah.
and it's the pathway that most people take, and you will make it, through the gates and out to the other side.
That's
And
right.
and you have very specific. I asked you about certain things like, whether it's be competitors or the marketing and so on and so forth, but there are so many, how would I say, challenges that you unpack that we all can learn from. And in my case, I've been in business for myself in this particular business almost 30 years. So I can also look back and have my own stories. Oh, yeah, I remember when that
I'm
happened.
sure you can. Yeah.
So I think that's why I say I see the book as being relevant for those who are seasoned, as well as for those who are just starting out. Either one, can
Right.
really, it can make a difference. Now, Brian, you also do keynote speeches and speaking for different organizations. Tell us about that. Who do you speak for? What kinds of things do you talk about?
Sure. I've got a wide range of clients. I have YPO and EO, they're entrepreneurial organizations. I do a lot for them. I've got several consulting companies who have like networking groups that they bring together, and I speak at some of the bigger events for those people. Corporations, especially finance corporations, a lot of financial people enjoy my stories because they're usually the ones financing all the entrepreneurs, and it's good for them to see the stories come back from the opposite direction of all the problems they're having trying to manage entrepreneurs, and they see firsthand what it takes for the entrepreneur to go through. So financing companies are really good, and I've spoken at a diverse array of manufacturing companies and sales and marketing, like companies that make shirts, branded shirts for stuff. It's everybody loves the stories that I talk about, and I tailor them to the event, where I'm speaking. So I really love speaking from the stage because I'm really good at it, and I tell stories. I don't just have a bunch of charts and pop charts and shit. I don't have anything like that, and I just try and keep it full of stories and basically entertain the audience, but give them really, really good takeaways as I do so.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure it's like having the living book, if you will, right there
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you're sharing the different stories. So how can people get a hold of you? How can they reach you if they want to book you for an engagement? How can they get a hold of the book? Those sorts of things.
Sure. The book's available on Amazon. It's called The Birth of a Brand. And then for reaching me for speaking, my website is briansmithspeaker.com. And so you'll find at the end of that, there's my email address, brian@briansmithspeaker.com. And I would love to field your inquiries and discuss whether I can be available to come and talk, because that really is the most fun I get out of my life right now.
I want to say thank you and really appreciate you for just being willing to share your journey and help the others who are coming behind you. That is such an important role, and not everybody's willing to do it. So let me just applaud you,
Thank
for
you.
that, just to begin with.
Yeah.
And then let me ask you too, before we close down, just in a brief way, share with us what happened with the company, because you eventually sold it. Tell us
Yeah.
about that and how the company's doing now, what's happening now.
Sure, sure. After I got the company back, I refinanced it in a better way and was able to build it up to about 15 million in sales. And then we just put the new product line out in January, and it was like taking off. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's going to be 25 million next year. And I knew that I had no way to finance that growth. I just knew I didn't have the skill to do it. And it was probably just going to implode. And I'd met a guy along the way, you know, when we were selling in the surf shops in the very early days, and he had a product called Teva sandals. And when Teva, the outdoor market, took off, he went public with that. And so, you know, public company had about $28 to $30 million in the bank, free. And I was heading to a big trade show in Atlanta, and I saw Doug at the other end of the baggage claim at the airport, and I just got this massive dose of goosebumps again, which again is my outer intuition telling me, oh my God. And I thought, oh my God, he's got 28, 30 million in the bank. His company dies every winter. Our company dies every summer. Let's put them together. And so we walked up and we high-fived each other and said, Doug, if ever we're going to do this, now's the time. And so I was able to, you know, that afternoon, the accountants started talking to each other back in California. And like 8 or 9 months later, we consummated the sale. So we sold out 100% to Deckers Corporation. And a lot of people ask me, well, Brian, it's gone into the billions now, right? Don't you regret that? And I think back and I go, well, two things. Number one, I'm not the right guy to take it into the billions, right? I love the entrepreneurial uncertainty and free flowing, you know, chaos. That's my wheelhouse, right? I can't stand being in a board meeting at a public company. And I'd been there, right? And the other part of it is that, you know, when you think you can't give birth to adults, right? I'd conceived of the idea of UGG. I'd got the first 6 pairs of samples. That was the birth. I'd been through the infancy, and it didn't move for like 3 or 4 years. And then I got it toddling, and then I got it into the youth, and that was starting to go really, we were getting nationwide in the youth. And now we were hitting the teenage years, and that's when the big money comes in. You know, we're looking at, you know, going from 15 to 25 million. That's teenage stuff, right? It's chaotic, right? And I knew that if I didn't sell it then, that it'd probably implode. So I just imagined myself walking my baby down the aisle at a wedding and handing her off to Deckers Outdoor Corporation, who would then go out into the world and take it, you know, into the billions. And that's sort of how I look at it. So I never regret for one day having sold the company.
That's a great story too, just to talk about reasons to sell so the business can continue to grow, and recognizing when you've taken it as far as you can take it with the skills and the abilities that God has given you. So that's important for people to know as well. What's your final, maybe a word of wisdom that you want to leave for my community of executive business leaders, those who may be in the corporate boardrooms?
Sure.
What would you say to them?
Sure. Well, I like to close with my favorite piece of philosophy. And it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur struggling in the early stages, the middle stages, or if you're in an established business on the corporate ladder. We've all got this issue of time that we're dealing with. Like, I should be more, I should be this, I should be that. Why is that person there in front of me? You know, and how do I overcome these? You know, so my best piece of philosophy I can give, and it works in every situation, and not just business, it works at home as well, right? And that is, the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole, right? You cannot change the future. Hasn't come yet. The past is done. But if you can manage to live in the now and enjoy, and the most important word there is happily. You must live happily as a tadpole. If you can do that, then the march of time just works in your favor. It's uncanny, but it just works in your favor. So if you can hold that attitude and just keep doing the best you can every single day, that's the secret to a happy life.
Well, that's an important secret. And thank you so much, Brian, for being here with me today and sharing multiple secrets with my community. And I want to let you know, I do have a pair of UGG boots, and I am very much not in the typical demographic because I like fancy kind of like, New York fashion kind of stuff.
Right.
I bought them because they were natural sheepskin and I hate synthetics.
Right.
And I love them for the cold weather that we have here in Colorado. And I wear them with my stocking skirts and dresses anyway. So just want you to know.
Thanks for that. That's great.
So anyway, as we close today, I just want to share a couple verses. And this is from Proverbs, the 19th chapter, verses 20 to 21. And it says, "Listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, that will stand." Thank you for listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. I am also your concierge executive leadership advisor for when you need to make tough business decisions, lead change, create a positive and profitable company culture, develop an enterprise-focused executive team, or prepare for leadership transition and succession. Contact me at Dr. Karen, at transleadership.com. Also go to my website, www.transleadership.com, for more leadership resources. I want to give special thanks to Ron McMillan, gospel jazz saxophonist, National Billboard recording artist, also known as Mr. Sirius XM, for allowing us to use his gifted music on our show, and to Chad Barr of the Chad Barr Group for serving as our show producer. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.